A rancher saw his horse digging at the same place daily. Then he discovered what was buried. Each morning, under the cottonwoods, Damare struck the ground like she knew a secret. When the rancher finally dug, his world split wide open. Beneath the dust lay letters from the wife he lost and a plea that would force him to face the very man he swore to. Hate, but just as hope flickered, trouble thundered into town railroad men with fire in their eyes, and a daughter caught between two worlds. A barn set ablaze, a family torn in half, and a choice no rancher should ever have to make. What was hidden in those letters? Why did the horse lead him there? And when the smoke clears, will forgiveness save them all, or will the past bury them deeper than any grave? Comment below, and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more of the October morning dawn, crisp and clear over Levi Carver's ranch. Pink light crept across the weathered boards of the barn as he stepped out of his house, pulling his worn leather gloves from his pocket. The routine was as familiar to him as breathing. Feed the cattle, check the horses, mend whatever needed fixing. These daily tasks kept his hands busy, and his mind from wandering too deep into memories of Anadot. His boots crunched across the frost-kissed ground as he made his way to the feed shed. The old Palomino mare, Daisy, lifted her head from where she stood beneath the cottonwoods, her ears pricking forward at his approach. She'd been Anna's favorite, gentle enough for his wife to ride even when her illness had left her weak. Now the horse seemed to carry a hint of that same quiet wisdom in her dark eyes. "Morning. Girl," Levi murmured, his voice rough from disuse. Living alone these past 2 years, he'd gotten out of the habit of much talking. The mare nickered softly in response, then turned her attention back to the ground, pawing at the earth beneath the scattered cottonwood leaves. Levi shook his head as he hauled out the feed sacks. "Ain't nothing there but dirt, old girl," he called over his shoulder. But Daisy paid him no mind, continuing to strike at the same spot with her hoof, sending little puffs of dust into the morning air. The cattle lowed hungrily as he made his rounds with their feed, his breath making clouds in the cold air. The sun climbed higher, warming his shoulders as he worked. When he glanced back toward the cottonwoods, Daisy had finally wandered off to graze with the other horses by mid-morning. Levi was deep in the task of mending fence posts along the north pasture. The steady rhythm of hammering helped quiet the endless circle of thoughts that seemed to plague him. These days, memories of Anna's smile, the sound of her humming as she worked in their kitchen, the way her faith had never wavered even when the doctor said there was nothing more to be done. The clang of his hammer against the fence staple was interrupted by the familiar sound of hoofbeats. Looking up, he saw Daisy had made her way back to that same spot beneath the cottonwoods. Even from this distance, he could see the intensity of her focus as she pawed at the ground again. "Now what's got into you?" he muttered, pausing in his work to watch. In all the years they'd owned her, he'd never seen the mare act quite like this. She wasn't the type for nervous habits or foolishness. Anna had always said Daisy was the most sensible horse she'd ever known. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores, checking water levels in the stock tanks, patching a loose board on the chicken coop, taking inventory of his winter feed supplies. But every time he passed near the cottonwoods, there was Daisy. Returning to that spot like it held some kind of answer to a question, Levi couldn't hear Dot as evening settled over the ranch. He made his way back to the house. The kitchen felt too big, too quiet as he heated up a pot of beans and cut himself a slice of the bread he bought in town 3 days ago. The lamp cast yellow light across the empty chair where Anna used to sit, her Bible always close at hand. She'd read from it every evening, sometimes sharing passages that spoke to her heart. Levi hadn't touched that Bible since she'd gone. He was scraping the last of the beans from his plate when Daisy's distinct whinny carried through the window. Setting down his fork, he walked to the door and looked out. In the gathering darkness, he could make out the mare's pale coat beneath the cottonwoods. Even now, she was still at it, striking the earth with deliberate purpose. Levi's hand fell to the doorframe, fingers tracing a groove in the wood where Anna had once marked their daughter's height before the fever took her. His wife had always said there were messages in the world if you were willing to listen. And that God spoke through the smallest thing sometimes. Back then, he'd smiled at her gentle certainties, loving her faith even when he couldn't quite share it. Now, watching Daisy's persistent behavior, something stirred in his memory. Anna's voice, soft but sure. That Mare's got more sense than most people I know. When she's trying to tell you something, you do well to pay attention. The weight of the day's work settled into Levi's bones as he turned back inside. But his mind was already made up. Come morning, he'd take a shovel to that spot and see what had gotten Daisy so worked up. Maybe it was nothing, just some animal's old burrow or a twisted root. But maybe he paused at the window, looking out at the cottonwoods silvered by starlight. Maybe Anna had been right about messages coming in unexpected ways. The thought followed him as he banked the fire for the night and climbed the stairs to his lonely bed. Tomorrow would bring answers one way or another. Sleep came slowly, accompanied by the distant sound of coyotes and the whisper of wind through the cottonwood leaves. In the barn, Daisy had finally settled for the night, but the mystery of her behavior lingered like a question waiting to be answered in the dawn dot through the small window of his bedroom. Levi could see the stars Anna had loved so much. She'd known all their names, could trace the shapes they made across the sky. Everything has a purpose, she used to say. We just have to be patient enough to understand it. As his eyes grew heavy, Levi found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, Daisy's strange fixation was more than chance. The thought followed him into his dreams, where Anna's voice seemed to whisper on the edge of hearing, and the sound of hooves striking earth echoed like a distant heartbeat. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, marking the hours until morning would bring revelation. In the darkness, the ranch held its secrets close, waiting for the light of day to unlock whatever mystery lay buried beneath the cottonwood's spreading branches dot in these quiet hours before dawn. Something shifted in Levi's heart, a softening, perhaps, or an awakening. Whatever tomorrow might reveal, he knew that paying attention to Daisy's insistent message was the right thing to do. Anna would have listened right away, he realized with a pang of regret. She'd always been better at seeing the important things that others missed as sleep finally claimed him. Levi's last conscious thought was a prayer, the first he'd attempted since Anna's passing. It wasn't elegant or long, just a simple request for guidance in understanding whatever message awaited him beneath the cottonwoods. It felt rusty and uncertain, this reaching toward faith again, but somehow right. Like taking the first step on a long-neglected path, the sun had barely lifted above the eastern hills when Levi Carver stepped out onto his front porch, spade in hand. Dawn painted the cottonwoods in shades of gold, their leaves rustling in the morning breeze. Daisy stood waiting beneath the trees, as if she knew what the day would bring. Levi's weathered boots left dark prints in the frost-covered grass as he made his way across the yard. The old Mare nickered softly, moving aside as he approached the spot she'd been pawing at for days. Her persistence had nagged at him through sleepless hours, until he could no longer ignore the feeling that something important lay beneath that patch of earth. "All right, girl," he muttered, positioning the spade. "Let's see what you've been trying to tell me." The first bite of steel into soil broke the morning quiet. Levi worked steadily, his breath clouding in the cool air as he dug deeper. The familiar burn of labor settled into his shoulders, but something kept him going, perhaps the way Daisy watched his every move, or the memory of Anna's voice telling him to trust in signs from above dot after an hour of digging. His spade struck something solid. The metallic clang sent a jolt up his arms. Dropping to his knees, Levi brushed away loose dirt with trembling fingers. There, wrapped carefully in oilskin, lay a metal box about the size of a Bible. His heart hammered against his ribs as he lifted it from the earth. The package was heavy, its contents shifting slightly as he carried it to the wooden bench near the house. Daisy followed, her hooves quiet in the grass. With careful movements, Levi unwrapped the oilskin, revealing a tin box gone dull with age but still sealed tight against the elements. The lid creaked as he opened it. Inside, he found a stack of letters bound with faded blue ribbon, the paper soft and yellowed at the edges. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized Anna's delicate handwriting. The top envelope bore his name in her familiar script. Levi's fingers shook as he opened the first letter. "My dearest Levi, if you're reading this, then the Lord has called me home. And faithful Daisy has led you to what I couldn't say in life. These pages hold my heart's burden and my deepest prayer. Anna's words flowed across the page. Her voice as clear in his mind as if she sat beside him. She wrote of her love, her faith, and her hope that even in death she might help heal what was broken. But it was when she mentioned Jonas that Levi's chest tightened. My brother walks between two worlds. Carrying hurts from both, she had written. The same blood that flows in my veins flows in his, and in the eyes of our Father, we are all his children. I've prayed every day that you might see him as I do, not as half Apache or half white, but wholly human, wholly deserving of love and respect. Levi lowered the letter, his vision blurring. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming his shoulders, but he felt cold inside. Jonas Nantin. The name stirred old memories, old prejudices he thought buried with Anna. Her half-brother had always stood apart, proud and distant, carrying himself with a dignity that some folks in town had taken as defiance. More letters waited in the box. Levi rayed through the morning hours, each page revealing more of Anna's heart. She wrote of scripture that had guided her, of dreams where she saw her family whole and unified. Her words were gentle but firm, wrapped in encouragement and understanding of how hard forgiveness could be. Remember Matthew 6:14. One letter read, "For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you." At the bottom of the box, nestled in a scrap of soft cloth, lay a tarnished silver cross, the one Anna's mother had given her, the one she'd worn until her final days. Levi lifted it carefully, feeling its familiar weight. The silver felt warm in his palm, as if it held some of Anna's spirit still taut as evening approached. Levi sat in his kitchen, the letters spread before him on the worn table. The lamp cast a gentle glow over Anna's words as his tired eyes moved across her final letter. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten as he lost himself in her last message. My beloved husband, I leave you with this final plea. If ever Jonas comes to you, welcome him as kin. The land speaks to him as it does to you, and he has more right to it than most who'd claim it. Let the walls between you crumble, for they're built of nothing but fear and misunderstanding. Open your heart as you opened it to me, and trust that God's love is big enough to embrace us all. Your loving wife, Anna. Levi set the letter down, his calloused fingers lingering on the paper. The quiet of the house pressed in around him, broken only by the soft tick of the mantel clock and the distant lowing of cattle. Anna's words had stirred something in him, comfort in hearing her voice again. Yes, but also an unsettling awareness of the task she'd left him. The silver cross caught the lamplight as he turned it over in his hands. Anna had worn it every day, touching it whenever she prayed or faced a difficult decision. Now its weight seemed to carry all the responsibility of her final request. Welcome Jonas as kin. The words echoed in his mind as he stared out the window at the gathering dusk. How could he fulfill such a promise? The distance between him and Jonas felt as vast as the prairie itself, carved deep by years of unspoken words and hardened hearts. Yet Anna had believed it possible. She'd believed it enough to leave these letters, trusting that someday he would find them and that her words would still have the power to move him. As the lamp flickered, Levi carefully gathered the letters, binding them again with their blue ribbon. He placed them and the cross back in their tin box, handling them like the precious treasures they were. The discovery had left him both comforted and unsettled, caught between the peace of hearing Anna's voice again and the challenge of her final request. As night settled over the ranch, Levi sat with her words echoing in his heart, wondering how a man could learn to see with new eyes what he'd spent so long looking past. The morning after finding Anna's letters, Levi hitched Daisy to the wagon for the monthly supply run into town. His thoughts kept drifting back to the words he'd read by lamplight, Anna's gentle plea for forgiveness echoing in his mind. The old Palomino Mare took a few unsteady steps as they started down the rutted road. Easy there, girl. Levi climbed down from the wagon seat, his boots crunching on the gravelly soil. He ran his hands along Daisy's legs, feeling the slight warmth in her left foreleg. The Mare's dark eyes watched him patiently as he worked his way down to her hoof. We'll take it slow today, he murmured, patting her neck. He took hold of her lead rope and started walking beside the wagon, letting her set an easier pace. The October sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill as they made their way toward Miller's Creek. The general store's weathered sign came into view just before noon. Levi tied Daisy to the hitching post, making sure she had water in the trough before heading inside. The bell above the door jangled as he entered. "Morning, Levi," Sam Miller called from behind the counter. The storekeeper's round face was pinched with worry, unusual for the typically cheerful man. "Sam," Levi nodded, reaching for his supply list. The store wasn't empty as he'd hoped. Several townspeople clustered near the pickle barrel, their voices low but urgent. Double quotes. Third survey stake pulled up this week. Levi caught fragments as he gathered his supplies. "Railroad men say it's them Apache troublemakers. Whole valley's gonna change once them tracks come through." Another voice added, "About time somebody put a stop to the sabotage." Levi's hand stilled on a sack of coffee beans. He thought of Anna's letters, of her brother Jonas, who'd vanished into Apache territory years ago. The whispers continued behind him. "Hired guns, I heard. Real mean bunch. Don't care much who they rough up. Long as the railroad gets what it wants." Sam Miller cleared his throat as Levi approached the counter with his goods. "Rough business, all this railway trouble," the storekeeper said quietly. "Word is they're offering rewards now for information about any Indians causing problems." Levi paid for his supplies in silence, but his mind was churning. Anna's words from the letter seemed to press against his chest. "If ever he comes to you, welcome him as kin." The ride home took longer with Daisy's tender leg. The sun was already sinking toward the western hills when Levi spotted movement ahead, 2 riders approaching along the road. His hand moved to the revolver at his hip, a habit born of years. Living alone on the frontier. As the riders drew closer, Levi's breath caught. The man was tall and straight-backed on his horse, with sharp features that reminded him painfully of Anna Jonas. The years had left their mark. Gray threaded his black hair, and lines carved deep around his mouth, but there was no mistaking Anna's half-brother. Beside him rode a young girl, perhaps 12 years old, her dark hair in 2 long braids. She sat her horse with the easy grace of someone born to riding. When she caught sight of Levi, a shy smile lifted the corners of her mouth, a smile so like Anna's it made his chest ache. "Mr. Carver, Jonas's." Voice was quiet but carried clearly in the evening air. He raised his hand slowly, palm out. "We don't mean any trouble." Levi's fingers loosened on his revolver, though he didn't remove his hand entirely. "Jonas," he acknowledged. His gaze moved to the girl. "This would be Rosa?" The girl's smile widened slightly at hearing her name. "Yes, sir," she answered softly. Anna used to write about you in her letters." The simple words struck Levi like a physical blow. He thought of the stack of letters in his house, Anna's final wishes still fresh in his mind. After a long moment, he cleared his throat. "Got stew on the stove," he said gruffly. "Might as well come share it." The kitchen felt smaller with 3 people around the table. Lamplight caught the steam rising from their bowls as an awkward silence stretched between them. Rosa's eyes kept darting around the room, taking in the familiar items Anna had arranged years ago, the blue and white china plates on their shelf, the cross-stitched blessing above the stove. Railroad men been causing trouble? Levi finally asked, watching Jonas over his coffee cup. Jonas's shoulders tensed. "They say we're sabotaging their survey work, using it as an excuse to drive our people off the land." He stirred his stew without eating. 2 days ago, they burned out a family near the creek. Said they had evidence of stolen survey stakes in their camp. Did they? Levi asked evenly. No. Jonas's dark eyes met his directly. But truth doesn't matter much to men like that. They're offering bounties now. For any Apache, they can blame their troubles on. Rosa's spoon clinked against her bowl as her hand trembled slightly. Jonas reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently. "We've been riding hard for 2 days," Jonas continued. "Needed to get Rosa somewhere safe. I remembered." He paused, looking around the kitchen. "Anna always said you were a man of honor. That you'd do right even when it wasn't easy." Levi's throat tightened. He could almost hear Anna's voice speaking those words. The silver cross from her letters seemed to burn in his pocket where he'd carried it all day. "Railroad men know you headed this way?" he asked. No. Jonas shook his head. "We were careful. Stuck to the high ground, crossed the creek 3 times to muddy our trail. But they won't stop looking." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft tick of the mantel clock. Through the window, Levi could see the cottonwoods where Daisy had led him to Anna's letters just yesterday. The timing seemed more than coincidence. Rosa's quiet voice broke into his thoughts. "Papa says Aunt Anna loved this place. Said it was like a piece of heaven." She looked at Levi with eyes too old for her young face. "We won't bring trouble to your heaven. Mr. Carver, we can leave at first light." Levi stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, staring out at the gathering darkness. Anna's words echoed in his mind. Welcome him as kin. The choice lay before him now. Turn them away to almost certain harm, or risk everything to help his wife's family. His land, his safety, his standing with his neighbors, all could be lost if he chose wrong. He turned back to the table, to Jonas's wary face and Rose's hopeful eyes. The moments stretched like a thread about to snap. Moonlight filtered through the kitchen window as Levi sat at his worn table. Anna's letter spread before him. Sleep wouldn't come, not with her words burning in his mind. The silver cross she'd left him caught the dim light, throwing tiny sparkles across the weathered pages. If ever he comes to you, welcome him as kin. The words seemed to whisper from the paper in Anna's voice. Levi ran a calloused hand across his face, feeling the weight of the day's unexpected reunion with Jonas and young Rosa. Floorboards creaked above as his gas settled in Anna's old sewing room. Every noise made him reach for his revolver, then stop himself. The railroad men wouldn't wait long before widening their search. Levi knew they're kind, ruthless men who'd burn down a homestead just to prove a point. He read through the letters again, his wife's careful handwriting telling stories of her childhood with Jonas, of their mother's quiet strength, of the way the land had been their inheritance and their burden both. The valley remembers its own, she'd written. And so must we. Dawn came too soon, painting the kitchen walls pink through unwashed windows. Levi had dozed off in his chair, letters still clutched in his hand. The smell of coffee roused him. Fully, Jonas stood at the stove. 2 tin cups steaming on the counter. Thought you might want some, Jonas said stiffly. Sliding 1 cup across the table, Levi nodded his thanks, studying the man's face in morning light. He saw Anna there in the set of his jaw, the way he held himself straight despite exhaustion. Reckon we ought to ride the fence line, Levi said at last. Made sure everything's secure. Out in the yard, Rosa was already up, scattering feed for the chickens. Her small figure reminded Levi of Anna at that age, before life had drawn lines between them all. He settled Daisy while Jonas checked his own mount, their movements careful, deliberate, like 2 wolves circling. The morning air bit cold as they rode out, hooves crunching on frost-covered grass. They passed the cottonwood where Daisy had led Levi to Anna's box, and he felt a familiar ache in his chest. There were raids, Levi said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. Good folks. Lost everything. Some died. Jonas's face hardened. And some of us lost our lands, our people. Promises broken like dry twigs. He gestured to the distant mountains. My grandfather is buried up there. Now they want to blast through his resting place for their iron horse. They rode on, checking posts and wire, each man wrapped in his own thoughts. A red-tailed hawk screamed overhead, making both horses dance sideways. Anna understood, Jonas said quietly. She saw both sides of things, like Rosa does. Levi thought of the girl's shy smile. So, like her aunts, she's got Anna's way about her, he admitted. Heard her humming this morning. Same hymn Anna used to sing while hanging in wash. Something in Jonas's shoulders softened. Rosa remembers her. Was only little when Anna visited the reservation that last time. But she remembers they finished the fence line as the sun climbed higher. The work giving their hands something to do while old wounds slowly bled out into words. Stories emerged between the silences of Anna's last visit, of Jonas's wife dying in childbirth, of choices made in anger and pride. when they returned to the ranch yard. Rosa was collecting eggs, her small basket nearly full. Her clear voice carried across the yard, singing Amazing Grace, just as Anna had done countless times. Levi felt something crack inside his chest, like ice breaking up on a spring river. The day passed in careful movements around each other, tasks shared in silent agreement. Rosa helped with supper, her small hands confident with the cornbread mixing. Jonas mended a broken stall door, his work neat and strong. Levi found himself watching them, seeing not intruders but family on his family, trying to survive. The sun was setting when they heard horses approaching, not bothering to hide their coming. Lantern light swayed through the gathering darkness, 3 riders taking shape against the horizon. Jonas went still, his hand moving to his gun belt. "Railroad men," he said, voice tight. "I know those horses." Levi moved to the window, counting shadows. "Rosa," he said firmly, "get inside now." "Up to the sewing room? Don't come down till one of us calls." The girl didn't argue, her eyes wide but steady as she slipped through the kitchen door. They heard her feet on the stairs, quick and light as a deer's. "You don't have to stand with us," Jonas said quietly, checking his ammunition. "This isn't your fight." Levi thought of Anna's letters, of her faith in both of them, of Rosa singing her aunt's hymn in the yard. He checked his own revolver, the weight familiar in his hand. "Reckon it is now," he said. "This is my land. You're my kin." They positioned themselves carefully, Jonas by the barn door, where shadows ran deep. Levi on the porch where lamplight would blind anyone looking in. The riders drew closer, their lanterns swinging like angry fireflies in the purple dusk. Levi could hear Daisy stamping nervously in her stall, smell wood smoke from the kitchen stove, feel his heart beating steady and strong against his ribs. The moments stretched like old leather, ready to split at a touch. In the upstairs window, a shadow moved, Rosa watching, Anna's cross probably clutched in her small hands. Levi thought of his wife's words again. The valley remembers its own. The riders were close enough now to see. Their faces in the lantern light hard men with cold eyes. Railroad company badges catching the glow. They reined in at the edge of the yard, and Levi knew with bone-deep certainty that his quiet life had just become a battleground. "Evening," Carver, the lead rider, called, his voice carrying false friendliness across the darkening yard. "Here you might be harboring some troublemakers. We've got some questions that need answering." Levi's fingers settled against his revolver's trigger, and he felt more than saw Jonas tensing in the shadows. Above them all, Rosa's window stood dark and silent, like an unblinking eye watching history repeat itself in the valley that remembered everything. 3 riders emerged from the darkness, their lanterns casting long shadows across Levi's yard. The lead horse, a tall bay, stepped forward into the yellow circle of porch light. The man atop it wore a dusty black coat and a silver badge that gleamed against his chest. "Evening," the man called out, his voice carrying an edge of authority. "Name's Marshall Cooper. Railroad business." Levi stood his ground on the porch, one hand resting casually near his belt. "What brings railroad men out this late?" "Looking for a half-breed named Jonas Nantan." Cooper's eyes swept the darkened windows of the ranch house. "Word is he's been causing trouble for our survey crews." The silence stretched like pulled taffy. Inside, Levi knew Jonas and Rosa were listening, holding their breath. He thought of Anna's letters, of her final wishes, and squared his shoulders. "Don't know any Nantan," Levi said evenly. "Just me and my stock out here." Cooper's horse shifted restlessly. "That so?" His companions moved their mounts closer, hands hovering near their holsters. "Because we track signs leading right to your property, Carver." "Lots of tracks out here," Levi replied. "Can't account for every rider passing through." The marshal's face hardened. "We don't take kindly to folks harboring troublemakers." "Railroad's got plans for this valley. Best not get in the way." "Much obliged for the warning," Levi said, his tone flat. "But, like I said, ain't nobody here but me." The standoff lasted another long moment before Cooper reined his horse around. "We'll be back, Carver." "Count on it." The 3 riders melted back into the darkness, hoofbeats fading into the night, Levi waited until he was sure they were gone before stepping inside. Jonas emerged from the shadows, Rosa clutching his hand. "Thank you," Jonas said quietly. Levi just nodded, his mind already working on their next move. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks when Levi hitched up his wagon. He'd loaded it with fresh eggs from the hen house and some tanned hides he'd been saving for market town. Jonas asked warily as Levi helped Rosa up onto the seat. "Best place to hide sometimes is right in plain sight," Levi explained. "Besides, got some business at the county seat needs tending." They rolled out under the rising sun, dust curling behind the wagon wheels. Rosa sat between them, a basket of eggs in her lap, while Jonas kept his hat pulled low. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and prairie grass. The town stirred to life as they arrived, shopkeepers opening their doors, women sweeping boardwalks. A few curious glances came their way, but Levi's presence seemed to discourage questions. He left Jonas and Rosa selling eggs to the general store owner's wife while he headed for the courthouse. The county clerk's office was dim and musty, filled with tall shelves of leather-bound books and filing drawers. Levi had come hoping to find anything that might help Jonas's situation. He hadn't expected it to practically fall into his lap, looking for something specific. The clerk asked, peering over his spectacles. "Land records," Levi said. "That cottonwood tract south of my place." The clerk shuffled through several drawers before pulling out a thick folder. "Interesting piece of land that. Been some dispute over it lately, with the railroad coming through." Levi leafed through the papers, his heart suddenly beating faster as he spotted a familiar name. There it was in faded ink, a proper deed filing for Jonas Nantan, dated 15 years back. The land had been legally purchased and recorded. "This still valid?" Levi asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The clerk adjusted his spectacles, studying the document. "Oh yes, perfectly legal deed. Railroad's been trying to claim it as unclaimed territory, but with this," he shook his head, "proper owners got full rights, assuming they can prove their identity." "Much obliged," Levi said, carefully copying down the filing details. As he turned to leave, the clerk called after him. "Word of warning, railroad men don't much care about paper rights these days. They've got money and guns backing their claims." Levi nodded grimly. "Reckon that's so." The sun was setting when they returned to the ranch, painting the cottonwoods in golden light. Levi had been quiet most of the ride home, turning over what he'd discovered and what it meant. After supper, while Rosa was washing dishes, Levi retrieved the papers he'd copied. He spread them carefully on the kitchen table where Jonas sat, the lamp casting a warm glow over the documents. "Found something today," Levi said quietly. "That tract of land by the cottonwoods, the one the railroad's pushing for." He tapped the papers. "It's yours, Jonas. Legal deed and all." Jonas stared at the documents, his hands trembling slightly as he picked them up. "I remember," he said softly. "Saved every dollar for 2 years to buy it. But after the trouble with the raids," he looked up at Levi, "thought the claim was lost." "It wasn't," Levi drew on a silver cross from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This land is yours, Jonas, by law and right." Rosa had stopped her washing to listen, her eyes wide with hope. Jonas touched the papers reverently, as if afraid they might disappear. "Won't be easy," Levi continued. "Railroad won't back down without a fight." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Been fighting all my life, brother-in-law." But this time, he glanced at the cross, then at Rosa. "This time, I've got something worth fighting for." Levi nodded, understanding in his heart that Anna had known this moment would come. She'd left those letters and that cross, knowing someday he'd have to choose between old prejudices and what was right. "Not fighting alone this time," Levi said quietly. And in those 4 words, he felt the weight of years of bitterness begin to lift. The lamp flickered, casting their shadows on the wall. 3 figures around a table, no longer divided by the past, but united by a future that would require all their courage to defend. Sunday morning dawned clear and cool, with dew sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Levi adjusted his collar in the mirror, remembering how Anna used to straighten his tie before church. In the kitchen, Rosa helped Jonas brush dust from his best coat, worn but dignified, like the man who wore it. "Reckon folks'll stare some," Levi said, his voice gentle. "But the good Lord's house welcomes all his children." Jonas nodded, his expression careful. "We understand, Mr. Carver." "Just Levi," he corrected, catching the silver cross in his pocket. "We're kin now." They rode into town in Levi's wagon, Rosa between them on the wooden seat. The church bell rang across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. White clapboard walls gleamed in the morning sun, and hitching posts already held a dozen horses. Conversation stopped as they climbed down from the wagon. Mothers pulled children closer, and men's hands strayed toward gun belts. But Levi walked tall beside Jonas and Rosa, nodding to his neighbors as if nothing were unusual about their presence. Inside the church, the air hung heavy with Sunday perfume and nervous whispers. Levi led them to Anna's old pew, third row from the front. Rosa's eyes went wide at the colored glass windows, while Jonas sat straight-backed, dignity in every line of his body. Reverend Matthews stood at the pulpit, his Bible open before him. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Jonas, but then his weathered face softened into a welcoming smile. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice filling the small sanctuary. "Today's scripture speaks of reconciliation." He read from 2 Corinthians. "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone. The new is here." Through the sermon, Levi noticed how the tension slowly eased from the room. The preacher's words about forgiveness and new beginnings seemed meant especially for them, though he knew the sermon had been planned weeks ago. The Lord worked in mysterious ways, just as Anna always said. When the final hymn ended, several children lingered near their pew, casting curious glances at Rosa. A freckled girl named Sarah finally stepped forward. "Do you know how to play jacks?" she asked Rosa shyly. Rosa looked to her father, who nodded slightly. "Yes," she answered with a smile. "My papa taught me." Soon a small group gathered around Rosa in the churchyard, sharing jacks and trading stories while their parents watched with varying degrees of acceptance. Jonas stood apart, but Levi noticed Tom Wheeler, a respected rancher, approach him. "Heard tell you got papers proving ownership of that cottonwood tract," Wheeler said. "Railroad's been giving us all grief lately." Might be time somebody stood up to them. Through the week that followed, Levi threw himself into preparing for the hearing. He spent hours at his kitchen table, carefully copying Anna's letters and organizing the deed documents. Jonas contributed his own records, tax receipts, and correspondence that proved his claim. Rosa helped too, her small hands sorting papers while she hummed hymns. The sound reminded Levi so much of Anna that sometimes he had to step outside to compose himself. Word spread through the valley about the upcoming hearing. Neighbors dropped by with information about railroad dealings, surveys, threats made, smallholders pushed out. Some, like Wheeler, offered to testify. Others kept their distance, fearing the railroad's long reach. Railroads got money and lawyers, warned Bill Jenkins, stopping by Wednesday afternoon. But they ain't got right on their side. "Count me in if you need a witness, Levi." Not everyone proved so supportive. Thursday brought Samuel Whitaker, who'd lost land to the railroad last year. "You're stirring up trouble, Carver," he said, refusing to dismount. "Them railroad men play rough. Better to let sleeping dogs lie." Levi stood his ground. "Ain't right to let fear rule justice. Sam, Anna taught me that." Friday evening found them gathered around Levi's kitchen table, sharing a meal of beef stew and fresh bread. Lamplight cast warm shadows on the walls, and the air smelled of hope despite the danger ahead. "This stew reminds me of my mother's cooking," Jonas said quietly. Breaking a long silence, "She taught Anna her recipe." Levi looked up, surprised. "Anna never told me that. There was much she wanted to share," Jonas replied. "But the times were hard." Rosa reached across the table and took both men's hands. "But now we're family," she said with simple faith. Just like in Reverend Matthews' sermon, the old is gone. The new is here. Levi squeezed her small hand, remembering Anna's words about welcoming Jonas as kin. The silver cross felt warm in his pocket, like a promise kept. Through the window came the evening song of meadowlarks, and the last sunlight painted the kitchen walls gold. Whatever dangers the railroad men might bring, this moment held its own kind of victory. 3 people sharing bread and trust, building bridges across old wounds. Wheeler and 2 other ranchers would ride with them to the county seat on Monday. The judge's verdict couldn't be predicted, but they had truth on their side. More importantly, they had each other. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Levi said, echoing Anna's favorite phrase. Who would have thought Daisy's digging would lead to all this? Jonas smiled slightly. Perhaps she knew something we didn't, like how to bring a family together. Rosa asked, her eyes bright with hope. "Just like that, little one," Levi answered. Just like that. The lamp flickered as night settled over the valley. In the distance, a coyote called, a lonely sound that somehow made their kitchen feel warmer, safer. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight they had this bread broken together, trust growing like spring grass, and the sure knowledge that Anna would have smiled to see them there. The county courthouse loomed before them, its weathered stone facade catching the morning sun. Levi straightened his best Sunday coat, stolen glances reflecting off his polished boots as he climbed the wooden steps beside Jonas and Rosa. The girl's hand was tucked into her father's, her dark eyes wide at the crowd gathering for the hearing. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the county. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight streaming through tall windows. At the front, Judge Harrison's bench stood empty, commanding attention with its dark oak presence. "Reckon there's folk here I ain't seen in years," Levi muttered, settling into his seat beside Jonas, the railroad company's lawyer. Mr. Peterson sat at the opposite table, his suit crisp and city fine. His smile was sharp as a coyote's. Sheriff Mills maintained order as more townspeople filed in. Rosa sat quietly between Levi and Jonas, her small fingers working the hem of her dress. Several church members nodded to them, including the preacher and his wife. Even old Mrs. Thompson, who hadn't left her farm in months, had come to watch. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Harrison." The judge entered, his silver hair catching the light. After settling into his chair, he adjusted his spectacles and surveyed the packed room. "Be seated. We're here today regarding land deed claims in the matter of the Western Pacific Railroad versus Jonas Nanten." Levi's heart quickened as Mr. Peterson rose first, presenting the railroad's case with practiced smoothness. He spoke of progress, of the iron horse's inevitable march westward, of deals already struck. His words painted Jonas as an obstacle to civilization itself. When Levi's turn came, his boots seemed to echo against the floorboards as he approached the witness stand. The oath felt heavy on his tongue, but Anna's cross pressed against his chest through his shirt pocket, steadying him. "Mr. Carver," the judge said, "you claim to have evidence regarding Mr. Nanten's deed to the contested tract?" "Yes, Your Honor." Levi's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "I have here the original deed, signed and notarized 15 years ago. It grants Jonas Nanten clear title to the Cottonwood tract, 40 acres along Cedar Creek. The paperwork passed from hand to hand, examined by both the judge and Mr. Peterson." Levi continued, drawing out Anna's letters from his coat. "I also have letters from my late wife, Anna Carver, who was Jonas's half-sister. She wrote these before her passing, confirming both their kinship and the land's rightful ownership." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Mr. Peterson's face tightened. "Objection, Your Honor. Personal correspondence hardly constitutes legal evidence. These letters speak to intent and family history." Levi countered, his voice steady. "They show that Jonas has connections to this land beyond just paper. He's family. My wife's bloodkin." Judge Harrison adjusted his spectacles again, carefully reading Anna's words. The courtroom held its breath. Levi caught Rosa's eye, offering a small nod of reassurance. "Mr. Peterson," the judge finally spoke, "does the railroad dispute the authenticity of this deed?" "No, Your Honor, but surely the company's plans for progress," the judge interrupted, "must be built on justice, not convenience." He set the papers down with deliberate care. "I've reviewed the evidence. The deed is valid, properly filed, and predates any railroad claims. Mr. Nanton's ownership of the Cottonwood tract is hereby confirmed as lawful and binding. The gallery erupted. Cheers and applause broke out like summer thunder. Rosa jumped up, throwing her arms around her father's neck. Jonas remained seated, his face a mask of dignity. But his eyes shone with unshed tears. Mr. Peterson gathered his papers with sharp movements, but Levi barely noticed. The preacher was shaking his hand, and Mrs. Thompson was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Sheriff Mills cracked a smile as they emerged into the afternoon sun. Neighbors surrounded them with congratulations. Someone suggested a celebration, and before Levi knew it, plans were being made for an evening gathering at his ranch. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Women arrived with covered dishes and pies. Men brought instruments and extra chairs. As sunset painted the sky in deep oranges and purples, Levi's ranch transformed. Lanterns hung from the porch posts, casting warm light over tables laden with food. The scent of coffee mingled with fresh-baked bread and Mrs. Peterson's famous apple cobbler. Fiddles tuned up in the yard, accompanied by Jim Walker's guitar and young Tommy's harmonica. Children chased fireflies while their parents spread blankets on the grass. Rosa flitted between groups, her laugh ringing clear and free for the first time since she'd arrived. Levi stood on his porch, watching it all. Jonas approached, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one to Levi with a nod. "Never thought I'd see the day," Jonas said quietly. "These people breaking bread with us like this." Levi sipped his coffee, remembering Anna's words about welcome and kinship. "Reckon sometimes folks just need a reason to do what's right." The music started up proper then, a lively reel that had several couples dancing in the yard. Rosa joined a group of children playing Crack the Whip, her dark hair streaming behind her as she ran, looking up at the stars beginning to peek through the twilight. Levi felt Anna's presence stronger than ever. She would have loved this, the music, the laughter, the coming together of neighbors. Most of all, she would have loved seeing her brother finally claim his rightful place. "Your sister," Levi said, his voice rough with emotion. She knew this day would come. Somehow she knew. Jonas nodded, understanding in his eyes. She always did see clearer than most. The fiddles switched to a slower tune, one Anna used to hum while working in her garden. Candles flickered on the tables, casting warm shadows across familiar faces now soft with friendship instead of suspicion. Children's laughter mixed with the cricket song, and somewhere in the darkness, Daisy whinnied contentedly. For the first time in years, Levi's ranch felt truly alive again. Not just with people, but with the kind of hope that Anna had always believed in, the kind that could bridge any divide, heal any wound, if only given the chance to grow. As the evening deepened and more stars appeared, Levi watched Rosa teach some town children a clapping game, while Jonas talked quietly with the preacher. The music played on, sweet and true, while neighbors passed plates and shared stories as if they'd been doing it all their lives. This was Anna's true legacy. Levi realized not just the letters that had brought justice, but this moment of unity under the vast western sky. Her faith in people's better nature had finally borne fruit, sweet as the pies being shared among former strangers who now felt like family. The celebration lingered into evening, warming Levi's ranch house with laughter and fellowship he hadn't known in years. Lantern lights spilled from the windows onto the porch where children played tag in the dust. Inside, the dining room buzzed with conversation as neighbors passed dishes of cornbread and stew across the worn oak table. Rosa sat between Jonas and Sarah Mitchell, the preacher's wife, her eyes bright as she listened to tales of her Aunt Anna's kindness. Jonas caught Levi's gaze across the room and nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his weathered face. The gesture spoke volumes, gratitude, respect, perhaps even the beginning of trust. As the clock struck 10, folks began gathering their things. Handshakes and hearty backslaps followed, along with promises to help clear new fence lines on Jonas's tract come Monday. Soon only a handful remained, helping to wash dishes and set the house to rights. "Reckon I'll check on the animals before turning in," Levi said, reaching for his barn coat. The night air had grown cool, carrying the sweet scent of autumn grass. His boots crunched across the yard, and he breathed deep, savoring the peaceful quiet after so much commotion. But something wasn't right. A faint haze drifted beneath the barn's eaves, catching silver in the moonlight. Levi quickened his pace, nostrils flaring at the acrid smell of smoke. His heart hammered as he yanked open the barn door. Orange flames licked up the wall behind the hay storage, spreading fast through the dry feed. Fire, he bellowed, voice cracking. Fire in the barn. Daisy's terrified whinny cut through the crackle of flames. The old Palomino Mar, the one who'd led him to Anna's letters, was trapped in her stall, kicking at the wooden walls in panic. Heat and smoke filled the space as Levi tried to reach her, but burning debris blocked his path. "Get water," he shouted toward the house. "Buckets, hurry." Running feet pounded the dirt. Jonas burst past him into the barn, bandana pulled over his nose. "The horse. Where?" "Jonas, no. It's too dangerous." But Jonas was already moving, ducking under a smoldering beam. The flames roared higher, consuming the hayloft. Levi could barely make out Jonas's shape through the smoke as he fought with Daisy's stall door. The Mare's frightened cries pierced the air. Neighbors rushed forward with buckets, forming a line from the well. Sarah Mitchell herded Rosa away from the inferno, holding the struggling girl as she screamed for her father. The water seemed useless against the hungry flames. Finally, the stall door gave way. Jonas emerged from the smoke, leading Daisy, her eyes rolling white with fear. But as they neared the entrance, an ominous crack split the air. Levi looked up to see the hayloft beam directly above them start to give way. "Jonas." Levi lunged forward as the massive timber crashed down. He caught a glimpse of Jonas shoving Daisy clear before the beam struck, pinning him to the ground. Without thinking, Levi plunged into the flames. The heat seared his lungs, but adrenaline gave him strength. He seized Jonas under the arms and pulled with everything he had. Slowly, agonizingly, they moved inch by inch toward the door. Other hands reached in to help Tom Baker and young Jim Wilson, dragging them the final few feet to safety. They collapsed in the yard as the bucket brigade fought to contain the blaze. Daisy trembled nearby, coat streaked with soot, but otherwise unharmed. But Jonas lay motionless in the dirt, chest barely rising with shallow breaths. "Pa." Rosa fell to her knees beside him, tears cutting clean tracks through the ash on her cheeks. "Pa, please wake up." Levi pressed shaking fingers to Jonas's neck, finding a weak pulse. Angry burns marked his arms and face where the beam had trapped him. Each labored breath whistled in his throat. "Someone ride for Doc Matthews," Levi ordered, stripping off his coat to cushion Jonas's head. "Fast as you can." The preacher's wife took charge, directing the men still fighting the fire while she helped Levi check Jonas's injuries. The burns looked bad, but the crushing weight of the beam worried Levi more. He'd seen men die from such injuries, their insides broken beyond repair. "Hold on, brother," he whispered, the word feeling right for the first time. "Hold on." Rosa huddled close, holding her father's hand and singing softly in Apache, a prayer song Levi guessed from the cadence. The flames gradually died under the determined assault of water and dirt, leaving the barn a smoking skeleton against the star-filled sky. But Levi barely noticed, his attention fixed on Jonas's struggle for each breath. Time stretched like molasses as they waited for the doctor. Neighbors brought blankets and lanterns, forming a protective circle around the injured man. The night air grew colder, but no one suggested moving Jonas until Doc Matthews arrived. "He saved Daisy," Levi said hoarsely, more to himself than anyone else. "The same horse that found Anna's letters. Like it was meant to be." Sarah Mitchell squeezed his shoulder. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she murmured. "We must have faith." But looking at Jonas's still form and Rose's tear-stained face, Levi felt his newfound faith wavering. After everything, the letters, the trial, the community coming together, it seemed cruel for it to end like this. The victory they'd celebrated just hours ago lay in ashes, as ruined as this scorched barn. Yet something made him reach for the silver cross he now wore on a leather cord. Eno's cross, found in the buried box. He wrapped his free hand around it, remembering her words about forgiveness and family, about welcome and redemption. Please, he prayed silently, holding tight to both the cross and Jonas's limp hand. Please don't let it end here. The minutes crept by with excruciating slowness. Jonas's breathing grew more labored, each intake a visible struggle. Rosa's prayer song never faltered, though her voice cracked with exhaustion and fear. Around them, neighbors kept vigil, their faces grave in the lantern light. Daisy drifted closer, nickering softly as she nosed at Jonas's boot. The old Mara seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, standing guard over the man who had risked everything to save her. Levi reached up to stroke her smoke-stained neck, remembering how she'd led him to Anna's final messages of love and hope. Now all he could do was wait and pray, and hold on to that hope as Jonas fought for his life under the vast western sky. The night pressed heavy and still around the ranch house. Inside, lamplight flickered across Jonas's prone form on Levi's bed, his breathing shallow and labored. Rose's small hands worked quickly alongside Levi's weathered ones, tearing clean sheets into strips for bandages. The smell of smoke still clung to their clothes, a bitter reminder of how quickly triumph had turned to tragedy. Hold steady now, Levi murmured, lifting Jonas's shoulder while Rosa wrapped another strip around his uncle's chest. The burns weren't as bad as they'd feared, but the beam had struck Jonas hard across the back. Each breath seemed to cost him dearly through the window. Levi watched the stars wheel overhead, marking the slow hours until dawn. He'd sent young Tommy Mitchell racing for the doctor as soon as they'd gotten Jonas inside, but it was a long ride to town. All they could do now was wait and pray. Rosa hadn't left her father's side. Her face drawn with worry, but her hands gentle and sure as she dabbed cool water on Jonas's forehead. He saved Daisy, she whispered, more to herself than to Levi. He didn't even think twice. Levi's throat tightened. The old Palomino Mare stood safe in a temporary corral they'd rigged, thanks to Jonas's courage. But the cost, watching that beam crash down, hearing the awful thud of impact, it haunted him with each passing hour. The first gray light of dawn was seeping into the sky when they heard hoofbeats and the rattle of wheels. Rosa flew to the window. The doctor's coming. Doc Matthews climbed down from his buggy, medical bag in hand, his face grave as he surveyed the charred remains of the barn. Inside, he examined Jonas with careful hands, listening to his breathing and checking his pupils. The frown deepening between his brows made Levi's stomach clench. It's not good, the doctor said finally, straightening up. There's damage inside, ribs for certain, maybe worse. The next day or two will tell. He paused, glancing at Rosa's tear-streaked face. I won't lie to you. His chances are slim. But he's strong, and that counts for something. He left them with laudanum for the pain and instructions for care, promising to return the next day. As his buggy disappeared down the road, Levi stood in the doorway, the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. If he hadn't pushed for that hearing, hadn't stirred up trouble with the railroad men. This is my doing, he muttered, hands clenching into fists. My pride brought this on us. Rosa touched his arm, her small face serious. Papa says pride is thinking we control more than we do. Good or bad? Her words, wise beyond her years, struck him to the heart. Still, as the morning wore on, Levi couldn't shake his guilt. He went through the motions of chores mechanically, his mind churning with dark thoughts. By mid-morning, word had spread through town. Neighbors began stopping by, bringing food and offering help. But with them came whispers. Some blamed Jonas, claiming he must have knocked over a lantern while skulking around. Others, speaking in hushed tones, insisted it was railroad grunge, a warning to anyone who dared stand against their plans. Levi listened to it all, his jaw tight. The truth was clear enough to him. The fire had been set, and set deliberately. But knowing that only made his guilt heavier. He'd drawn Jonas and Rosa into a stand against the railroad. And now Jonas lay fighting for his life. As evening approached, Levi found himself walking to blackened ruins of his barn. The timbers still smoldered in places, sending thin wisps of smoke into the darkening sky. He sank to his knees in the dirt, pulling Anna's letters from his shirt pocket. The paper was worn soft from repeated reading, Her words both comfort and accusation now. I don't know what to do, Hannah, he whispered. I tried to make things right, but look what's come of it. He stared up at the first stars appearing, cold and distant. Give me a sign. Show me the way forward. The crunch of boots and dirt made him turn. Rosa stood there, something glinting in her hand. She held it out, the silver cross from Anna's box of letters. Mama gave me this before she died, she said quietly. She told me to keep it safe until it was needed. Her fingers pressed the cross into his palm. She said hope never dies, even when we can't see it anymore. Levi stared at the cross, feeling its weight in his hand. The silver caught the last light of day, warming despite the evening chill. He remembered Anna wearing it on Sundays, how it had caught the sunlight as she sang in church. She'd believed in signs and wonders, in God's guidance through the darkest valleys. Rose's small hand slipped into his free one. Together they stood looking at the ruined barn, the cross a promise between them. Somewhere in the growing dark, a whippoorwill called, its song carrying across the evening air like a prayer. The night settled around them. But the stars didn't seem quite so cold anymore. Inside the house, Jonas breathed steadily, holding on. And in Levi's palm, Anna's cross warmed like a seed of hope, waiting to grow. Your mama was right, Levi said finally, squeezing Rosa's hand. Hope never dies. We just have to remember where to look for it. Together they turned back toward the house, where a lamp burned in the window, guiding them home through the gathering dark. Inside, Jonas stirred slightly as they entered, his face drawn with pain but peaceful. Rosa resumed her place beside him, humming softly, one of Anna's old hymns. Levi hung the cross on a nail by the bed, where the lamplight made it shine like a star brought down to earth. Through the long hours ahead, its presence would remind them that even in the darkest night, hope remained alive, waiting for dawn. Dawn broke cold and gray over the ranch house. Levi stood at the window, watching the first pale light creep across the yard, where scorched timbers from his barn lay scattered like fallen soldiers. The acrid smell of wet ash still hung in the air, a bitter reminder of last night's violence. Inside, Jonas's labored breathing filled the quiet room. Rosa hadn't left her father's side, her small hand clutching his larger one, dark circles shadowing her young eyes. The doctor's words from the night before rang in Levi's ears. If he makes it through the next day, he might have a chance. Levi adjusted his collar and reached for his hat. Rosa, I'm riding into town. You keep watch over your pa, you hear? She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, Uncle Levi. The title caught him off guard, warming something deep in his chest. I'll be back before sundown. He paused at the door. If anything changes, I'll send up a signal with the mirror. Like you showed me, Rosa assured him. Outside, Daisy waited, stamping her hooves against the morning chill. The old mare had recovered from the fire, though her coat still carried the tang of smoke. Levi checked her legs carefully before mounting. You did right by Jonas, old girl, he murmured, patting her neck. We both owe him. The ride into town felt longer than usual, each hoofbeat matching the rhythm of Levi's prayers. Not since Anna's passing had he prayed so hard, or felt so unsure of God's answer. Main Street stirred with early morning activity as Levi tied Daisy outside the church. Preacher Matthews was already in his study, bent over his Bible in the wan light. Brother Carver, the preacher, looked up, concern etching his weathered face. How fares Jonas? Not well, preacher. The doctor ain't certain, Levi's voice caught. He cleared his throat and tried again. I came to ask if you'd ride out. Maybe say some prayers over him. The preacher closed his Bible and stood. Of course. Let me gather my things. He paused, laying a gentle hand on Levi's shoulder. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Brother Carver. Sometimes he uses fire not to destroy, but to forge stronger bonds. They stepped out onto the church steps, where several townspeople had gathered, drawn by Levi's arrival. Sarah Miller, who ran the general store, stepped forward. Levi, we heard about the barn. Tom and I have some spare lumber from when we built our addition. It's yours if you want it. Old Pete Wilson nodded from his seat on a nearby bench. I reckon I could spare a day's work helping rebuild. These bones ain't what they used to be, but I still know which end of a hammer to hold. Levi felt his throat tighten. Much obliged, he managed, but not everyone shared their generous spirit. He noticed Franklin Pierce and his cronies watching from the saloon porch, their faces dark with suspicion. "Trouble follows them Indians," Franklin called out. "Mark my words, Carver. You're asking for more grief, harboring that breed." The preacher's voice cut through the morning air like a whip. "Judge not, lest to be judged." Franklin Pierce. "The good book speaks plain on loving thy neighbor." More townspeople approached, some offering help, others hanging back uncertainly. Levi accepted what was offered: nails from the hardware store, a box of medical supplies from Doc Wilson's wife, promises of labor from Strongbacks. Each gift felt like a small miracle, a reminder of the community Anna had loved so dearly. The ride back to the ranch was slower, with the preacher's buggy following behind. Daisy seemed to sense the urgency, picking her way carefully but quickly along the familiar trail. As they crested the last rise, Levi's heart seized. No signal mirror flashed from the house. He wasn't sure if that was good news or bad. They found Rosa exactly where he'd left her, keeping her quiet vigil. Jonas's fever still burned hot, but his breathing seemed steadier. The preacher knelt beside the bed, opening his Bible to the Psalms. His deep voice filled the room with ancient words of comfort. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." Rosa's eyes never left her father's face, but her lips moved silently with the familiar verses. Levi wondered if Anna had taught her these words, just as she'd taught her the hymns that now echoed in his memory. Daisy's soft nickering drew Levi to the window. The Mare had positioned herself near the house, as close to Jonas's room as she could get. Her ears were pricked forward, alert and watchful. Like a sentinel standing guard dot as evening approached, the preacher departed with a promise to return tomorrow. Rosa remained at her post, humming softly, the same hymn she'd sung in the chicken coop days ago. When the world had seemed simpler, Levi pulled a chair beside her. The silver cross Anna had left gleamed in the fading light, now hanging from a leather cord around Rosa's neck. It was time to share what he should have told them days ago. "Rosa," he began quietly, "there's something you should know about your Aunt Anna." He reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew one of the letters, carefully preserved. Before she left us, she wrote these. "About you and your pa." Rosa's eyes widened as he began to read Anna's words aloud. "My dearest Levi, if you're reading this, then I'm already with our Lord, but there's a burden on my heart I must share. My brother Jonas is a good man, though the world has treated him harsh. If ever he comes to you, welcome him as kin. The land knows no difference between blood, and neither does God's love." Tears slipped down Rosa's cheeks as Levi read on, Anna's words painting a picture of hope and reconciliation. When he finished, the room was dark except for the lamp's glow. "Your mama wanted us to be family," Levi said softly. "I aim to honor that wish, no matter what comes. You and your pa, you've got a home here as long as you want it." He reached out, awkwardly at first, then with more certainty, and squeezed Rosa's shoulder. "We'll rebuild the barn. We'll face down whatever's coming together." Rosa leaned into his touch, her voice thick with tears, but strong with faith. "Mama always said God answers prayers. Sometimes, just not the way we expect." From the bed, Jonas stirred slightly, his fever-bright eyes opening for a moment. His hand tightened weakly around Rosa's fingers before he slipped back into sleep. But his breathing seemed easier, more peaceful. Outside, a coyote called, lonely across the darkening land. Daisy answered with a soft whicker, still standing her guard. The night settled around them like a blanket, and for the first time since the fire, Levi felt something like peace steal into his heart. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it as family, just as Anna had wished. The morning after Levi's promise to Rosa, the sound of wagon wheels crunching gravel broke the dawn silence. Tom Miller's team pulled up to the ranch, his wagon bed loaded with fresh-cut lumber. Sarah, his wife, sat beside him with a basket of still-warm biscuits. "Thought you could use some breakfast," she said, climbing down. "And some help getting started?" More wagons followed throughout the morning. Old Pete Wilson brought nails by the keg. The Cooper boys arrived with posts and beams. Even Sheriff Davies drove out with his tools, saying gruffly, "Can't have a ranch without a proper barn." Rosa moved between the workers like a bright spirit, offering water and thanks. Her gentle manner touched something in the townspeople's hearts. They watched her tend to Jonas between her rounds, singing hymns in her clear voice while bathing his fevered brow. Girls got faith enough for 10 grown men. Pete observed, wiping sweat from his neck. The preacher arrived daily, not just to pray over Jonas, but to work alongside the others. His sermons began addressing unity more directly. The good Lord didn't create borders between hearts, he declared one morning, hammer in hand. Prejudice is a human sin, not God's design. By Wednesday, the barn's frame rose against the sky. Daisy watched from her temporary pen, nickering approval as each beam went up. The old Mare hadn't left her post near Jonas's window. Except when Rosa led her to water, Jonas's fever broke Thursday morning. Though still too weak to rise, his eyes followed Rosa's movements with clarity. When told about the barn raising, tears traced down his weathered face. "Your sister, Anna," he whispered to Levi. She always said this town had good hearts under the fear. Friday evening saw the last board nailed in place. The new barn stood proud beneath the cottonwoods, larger and stronger than the old one. Fresh hay filled the loft, donated by farms across the valley. Even Franklin Pierce had sent his boys with a wagon load of feed. Though he himself stayed away, Levi and Rosa served up a thick beef stew to the volunteers. Lanterns swung from posts, casting warm light over tired but satisfied faces. Children played tag between the adults, legs while their parents shared coffee and conversation on the porch. "Reckon this is what community means," Sheriff Davies said, accepting a second bowl. Coming together when it matters, Rosa moved among their guests, her aunt's silver cross catching the lamplight. The gratitude in her eyes spoke louder than words, touching hearts that had once turned away in fear. A week crept by like molasses in winter. Levi and Rosa took turns at Jonas's bedside, watching for any change. The doctor visited daily, changing bandages and muttering prayers under his breath. Through it all, Jonas lay still as stone, his breathing shallow but steady. On the 7th morning, as sunlight painted the bedroom walls golden, Levi sat in his usual chair, reading one of Anna's letters aloud. Rosa had fallen asleep in the corner, her dark hair tumbled across her face. "Levi," the whisper was so faint he almost missed it. Levi's hands trembled, the letter falling to his lap. Jonas's eyes were open, clear, and focused for the first time in days. His cracked lips moved again, forming Levi's name. "I'm here," Levi said, leaning forward. His throat felt tight as a summer drought. "You're safe, Jonas. You're home." Rosa stirred at their voices, then bolted upright. "Papa!" She rushed to the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jonas's weathered hand lifted slightly from the quilt, reaching for his daughter. "My little one," he whispered. Rosa caught his fingers, pressing them to her wet face. "The barn." Jonas's voice was rough as prairie grass. "Did anyone? Everyone?" Levi cut in, clasping Jonas's other hand. "The whole town came. Built it bigger and stronger than before." Tears blurred his vision as years of bitterness dissolved like morning mist. "You saved Daisy? Nearly died doing it." "I reckon that makes us even for all those years of feuding." He drew a shaky breath. "Brother," the word hung in the air like a blessing. Jonas's fingers tightened around Levi's, and Rosa's sobs turned to laughter. The next afternoon, hoofbeats thundered through town. 6 railroad men rode down the main street, their faces dark with purpose. They reined up outside the general store, scanning the buildings with hard eyes, but the street wasn't empty. Townsfolk emerged from shops and homes, standing shoulder to shoulder. The Cooper brothers crossed their arms, blocking the way. Sarah Wheeler and the widow Matthews stood on the boardwalk, chins raised. The preacher stepped out of his church, Bible in hand. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the creak of saddle leather and the autumn wind. The railroad men shifted in their seats, outnumbered by the quiet strength of community. Their leader's scowl deepened as he spotted more faces in windows, more townspeople joining the silent wall of resistance. Finally, with muttered curses, they wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving only dust and the sweet taste of victory behind. Back at the ranch, when Levi told Jonas about the town stand, a smile creased the injured man's face. Anna always said love was stronger than fear, he murmured. Reckon she was right about that too. The golden days of autumn brought healing to both land and hearts. Jonas took his first steps outside with Rosa and Levi supporting him on either side. Though his limp might never fully fade, his spirit grew stronger each day. The morning sun caught his face as he stood beneath the cottonwoods, breathing deep the crisp air. Good to be vertical again, he said. With a slight smile, Levi watched his brother-in-law's progress with quiet satisfaction. One afternoon, while Jonas rested, Levi rode into town to visit Judge Harrison's office. The judge's eyebrows rose as Levi laid out his request. You want to name Rosa co-heir? The judge adjusted his spectacles. To both properties. That's right, Levi's voice was firm. The ranch and the cottonwood tracked both. She's family? The judge's pen scratched across official paper, drawing up the will. When finished, he studied Levi's face. You're doing a fine thing here, Carver. Back at the ranch. Rosa had taken to helping with the evening chores, singing as she gathered eggs and fed chickens. Her voice carried across the yard, sweet and clear as a bell, reminding Levi so much of Anna that his heart ached with gratitude instead of grief. Sunday mornings now found all three of them in church. Jonas and Rosa sitting beside Levi in the pew. Mrs. Wheeler, the blacksmith's wife, made a point of welcoming them warmly. After services, she approached with several other ladies. Rosa, she said, smiling, we'd love to have you join the school. Term's starting next week. Rosa's eyes lit up as she looked to her father. Jonas nodded, his own eyes bright with pride. Even old Sam Turner, who had been most vocal against Indians on his land, began tipping his hat to Jonas in town. The sight of Levi Carver, respected rancher, claiming Jonas as brother carried weight with the doubters. One evening, as autumn's chill crept in, they sat around Levi's kitchen table. The lamp cast warm light on their faces, and steam rose from bowls of hearty stew. Jonas raised his cup, his gesture deliberate and solemn. To family, he said, voice rich with meaning, and to Anna's faith that outlived us all. Levi and Rosa lifted their cups in return. Outside in the gathering dusk, Daisy's gentle nicker floated through the window. The mare stood contentedly under the cottonwoods, where it all began. Healthy and at peace, Rosa reached for both men's hands, completing their circle. The silver cross hung at her throat now, catching the lamplight just as it had caught Anna's hope years ago. In that moment, Levi knew with certainty that his wife's last wish had borne fruit sweeter than any of them could have. Imagine the morning dawned crystal clear. Spring sunshine warming the earth after winter's long sleep. Dew sparkled on new grass as Levi led Jonas and Rosa toward the cottonwoods, their boots leaving dark prints in the damp soil. Daisy followed behind them, her hooves familiar with this path she'd worn months ago. Levi carried a spade in one hand and Anna's final letter in the other, the paper worn soft at its creases from countless readings. Jonas limped slightly but moved steadily, while Rosa skipped ahead, her dark braids bouncing against her back. Right here, Levi said, stopping where Daisy had once pawed so insistently at the earth. This is where she led me to the letters. His voice grew quiet with memory. Together, they dug a small hollow beneath the spreading roots. The soil was rich and dark, promising new growth. Rosa gathered wildflowers while they worked, weaving them into a simple crown. When the hollow was ready, Levi knelt and carefully wrapped Anna's letter in oilskin, just as she had done with her other messages. His weathered hands smoothed the package gently before laying it in the earth. Jonas stood close, one hand resting on his brother-in-law's shoulder, offering silent support. Seemed fitting, Levi said, roughly, to return her words to the land she loved. They covered the letter together, 3 pairs of hands patting the soil firm. Levi planted a wooden cross he'd carved himself, its surface smooth from hours of careful work. Rosa placed her wildflower crown at its base, the blooms bright against the dark earth, The family stood quiet for a moment, listening to spring wind whisper through cottonwood branches. Leaves danced overhead, catching sunlight like newly minted coins. Nearby, Daisy grazed contentedly, her palomino coat gleaming gold in the morning light. Rosa's solemnity didn't last long. A yellow butterfly drifted past, and she laughed in delight, giving chase across the grass. Her joy echoed against the tree trunks, pure as birdsong. Jonas squeezed Levi's shoulder. Anna would be proud of this, he said softly. Of all of this, Levi nodded, feeling peace settled deep in his soul like spring rain soaking parched ground. The land was safe now, family restored, and Anna's final wish fulfilled. Where grief had once carved hollow places in his heart, gratitude now flowed full and sweet. They mounted up to ride back to the ranch, Rosa still grinning from her butterfly chase. As they turned their horses homeward, Levi glanced back one last time. Sunlight filtered through the cottonwood leaves, dappling the fresh-turned earth where Anna's words lay buried. No longer hidden in sorrow, but planted in hope. Like seeds waiting to bloom, God, if today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.